Hi. Took ages getting there as usual. I thought I'd do Lucian Freud because some of you were going to go to the exhibition the other week at Tate Liverpool, and others might be thinking of going because it's on till January, I think, in Liverpool. And I didn't, well, like everybody else, I had some impression of what he did, but I didn't realize the full extent of what he did. Um, and so here's my views on him. So he was, you might know some of this. Some of you probably will do, and others won't. And there might be some stuff that nobody yet knows. He's now seen as a major portrait artist in this country, and but he was born in Berlin, the son of a Jewish architect and grandson of Sigmund Freud, who he met both in Germany and later in England. So he did have a relationship with Freud. He moved aged 11 to London, had some difficulty learning the language. And that's obviously after the Nazis rose to power and they were going to be under threat. He was naturalized as a British subject 6 years later and spent almost his entire working life based in London. An irrelevant piece of information, he was 5'6" tall.
Oh, he's tiny.
Well, you wouldn't, from his paintings, you've got an impression of him, I think, of him being huge, but that's what he was anyway. This is what he said about his work. My work is purely autobiographical. It's about myself and my surroundings. I work from the people that interest me. I use the people to invent my pictures with, and I can work more freely when they are there. So he liked working with people. He never worked from photographs. If it was a plant, he brought the plant in. If it was people, obviously they came in. So what I'm going to look at to concentrate are three features of what he did. The first one of them is his output on plants. 1/5 of all his paintings and drawings involved plants. And it's not seen as a particular area of his expertise. You know, when you hear of him, you don't think about that really, about him doing plants. Because, and also they're seen as very much a sort of secondary area of art, you know, after portraiture and so on, almost up there with animals. The other one is about trying to separate the artist from the man. And this is an issue I've had with all the male artists I've looked up to now. That's Klimt, Picasso, and now Freud. They all had tumultuous personal lives, and I don't think any of them come out of it particularly well, especially Picasso and Freud. And it then leads you to think, does it make you have a different view of his art, knowing more about the man? But I want to talk about that a bit. And then rising out of that is his relationship with women. And finally, look at his self-portraits, of which he did certainly over 50, maybe 60 of them in his lifetime. So that was his kind of one of his major focuses. Now, this is a very famous painting.
It's awful.
Well, it's they're not very often. They're not that easy to look at.
No, they're not.
It's very, as one commentator say, it's very charged and quite disturbing to look at. That's what gives people a problem, and that's what gives his work power and fascination. It's incredibly personal, and that comes through. But on the other hand, it's also detached and critical, and that's what makes it so intense. This one of a benefits supervisor sleeping was from 1995. And it's the job centre supervisor, Sue Tilley, who was introduced to by the Australian performer Lee Bowery, who he also painted. And it said she used to weigh around about 127 kilos at the time, which is over 19 stone.
Crumbs.
Yeah. His fascination with the body is quite evident, but it's when he puts it in his own words, it's flesh without muscle, and it has developed a different kind of texture through bearing such a weight-bearing thing. It also held the world record for the highest price paid for a painting by a living artist in up to the year 2008. Do you know who bought it? And there's a link with football here. Roman Abramovich.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't suppose many of you knew that.
No. Who is that?
Oh, sorry. He's the owner of Chelsea Football Club.
Oh, okay.
That was a link to football. Sorry. Of course, you're not very much into football.
I knew the name.
Yeah. These are two of his early portraits, and that's himself as a young man in 1954. And the second one on the right is him at the Museum of Modern Art in 2007. One of the things that's noticeable is that as he painted, in his youth, the paintings were quite small, or tended to be quite small, and tended to be quite sort of flat in terms of the paint he used. And as he got older, he seemed to use more and more paint. And this was one of them. Some writers credit him with the influence of his grandfather about psychological insight, but it's he didn't accept that at all. He said, I don't accept the information that I get when I look at myself. That's where the trouble starts. So he started off with a kind of linear graphic approach, and then to a much more fleshier, painterly style that he became his main focus. Now, this is one of his earlier ones, and one of his ones on fruit. You probably haven't seen that one of his, but I
think it's lovely.
I do quite like his painting. You know, this is just a box of apples in Wales in 1939. He was painted when he was, I think, age 17, and he started at the Central School of Art in London, but he didn't like it there and went on to the East Anglian School of Painting in Essex, oddly. But I quite like some of these, but maybe because it's so kind of normal. I don't know.
Yes, it's lovely. I think it's lovely.
But this one I really like as well. It's sort of one from 1951. It's actually somebody called Harry Diamond, an East Ender who Lucian knew, and who apparently had difficulties in life and found it difficult to communicate. Diamond complained while posing, but Freud was stimulated by his resentful aggressiveness. Diamond complained bitterly about, he was making his legs too short, but the whole thing was that his legs were too short.
Yes, what they were.
The red carpet he'd bought especially from a junk shop to paint in this, and he was very pleased about the way he painted that. I like the fact that it's ruckled, and also, of course, that there's a plant in front. And I think it's a pandanus, apparently. But it's interesting.
It looks like a yucca.
It doesn't it? Anyway, maybe I've got that wrong. But it's interesting that the plant is in the foreground of the painting. Nearly always plants were painted in the background of paintings.
Yes.
But I do quite like this one. It does seem to catch something.
I like it too. Yeah, I like it.
Hang on, you two. Can you? I've got noise in the background. Right. It's an interior plants and from 1968. And this one is the pandanus, the Pandanus baptisti. And again, fading into the background is a self-portrait of a shirtless Freud with his ears cupped and his eyes shut.
Oh yes.
It's the kind of representation of a domestic plant is counterpointed by the nudity of the artist. And a commentator says his gesture evoking an acoustic dimension through the silence of the painting and about our relationship with plants. Typical sort of art critic type thing to say. I suppose they make a living out of developing all sorts of interpretations like that. And it says that most of us have got a potted plant somewhere in our house, and it's a seemingly constant that they last for ages, and they become a special kind of companion. The keeper of secrets, passions, and desires and fears. Anyway, But it's certainly it's a glowing portrait, that, and it's sort of in your face, isn't it? Very much so, I think.
Yeah, the
Really
plant's
like
marvelous.
Here's another one you probably haven't seen, which he painted, in an earlier one, of bananas.
Oh, marvelous.
In 1952, he travelled to Jamaica and stayed with Ian Fleming, the James Bond author, again, after the collapse of his first marriage. And whilst Fleming was writing Casino Royale, he was doing this meticulous study of a banana plant.
It's wonderful, though.
It looks sort of Van Goghish, doesn't it, that? It looks like some of Van Gogh's stuff.
Yes, it does.
That's right. There is a kind of, yes, I think you're right. There is a link there. And what he said about it, I noticed I switched away from people when my life was under particular strain. Not using people is like taking a deep breath of fresh air. And you can see that. And again, it's another one of his that I particularly like.
I like it too. It's wonderful.
Then this one is of two plants, an aspidistra in the front, and so I am told Helichrysum petiolare. I'm sure that Jackie will correct me if I'm wrong there. It's a collage of the different states they went through over 3 years when he painted them. A metaphor for life, the passing of the years and the effect of time on living organisms. But it was with incredible precision, and it's one of his most ambitious paintings of the sort. And it has a real kind of feeling of things growing and fading, and leaves coming up and others dying. You know, there are bits of dead bits on it somewhere. You can see at the bottom left. And he painted over 100 drawings like 100 drawings like this of plants. As I said, a fifth of his output. And he always worked with them. Now I'm showing you one here, which is not by him. It's by Albrecht Dürer from 1503, and it's one that we've got hanging in our hallway. And I always like it because it's what it's expressing. You know, I think it's similar in some way, not in the way it's drawn or anything, but the subject matter is something that you might just tread on as you're walking. And
I like it too.
He makes you think about those very simple things that are really in themselves very, very beautiful. And I've always loved this painting, and I like the ones that that Freud does of paintings of bits of grass and other stuff that he does. I think they're great. That's a great piece of dirt. Now, on to his relationship with women.
That's well documented,
Isn't it just? He had at least, who does this remind you of? He didn't know how many children he had.
Bandish sod.
Yeah.
Good old Boris.
Yeah.
Bandish sod, I say.
He had at least...
He had
12 illegitimate children by 5 mistresses, with some estimating he had fathered as many as 40. That's in as well as the 2 that he had from his first wife. So his first wife was Kitty Garman, and he had 2 by her. And then whilst that was going on, he started having a relationship with a famous society beauty, Lady Carolyn Blackwood. The thing I really, really find hard to take about all this, well, I think the thing is, but both him and with Picasso, their intensity, their brilliance as artists, the fact that they were both bon viveurs and good conversationalists, and attractive in their own way, meant that he had no trouble attracting women. And of course, he was painting them for offers hours and days and weeks at a time. So it was easy for him to do. And in some senses, I suppose you could say it was understandable that he did that. But the one thing he did, which I really don't like, is that in his will, he left money to 10 of the children, but not 4 of them, from one of his wives, who was working class in background. He never married, he never lived with her, but he had 4 children while he was having a relationship with one of his other conquests, and he didn't include them in his will. Whereas all these kind of like society beauties, they all got those children got something out of the will. So I don't like that bit about him. And I don't think he comes out of it
Been
very
one
well.
night stands. Might have been one night stands.
Well, they weren't. They went over years. But I suppose the other aspect is a lot of these women knew what he was like. I'm not saying that excuses it, but they were, you know, they were overawed by his talent and the attention that he showed them. And when he was doing paintings, he was incredibly intense about it. He'd spend hours and hours and hours with them. And this was the one of 8 portraits that he did of his first wife, Kathleen or Kitty Garman. And she's pictured here against a beige wall. She's holding a kitten by its neck in a tense grip, which looks as if she's about to strangle it, actually.
Yes, that's what the poor little thing.
She was in fact the eldest daughter of the sculptor Jacob Epstein. So, and they were also linked. You know, Freud was linked with other painters around at the time, and he was part of a set, wasn't he? The kind of Soho set. So the small ones were often seen as associated with German expressionism, an influence he denied, and surrealism in depicting them in people and plants and animals in very unusual juxtapositions, as with this one.
It's quite scary.
Yeah. This is another portrait of Kitty, a very early one.
It's a good portrait, that. Very good.
It is, isn't it?
Marvellous.
She was known for a wide-eyed, a very, very big eyes and a feline feature which captivated Freud. And she, as I say, she was his frequent model. And this is a sort of commentator from one of the art critics. The background of green shutters with areas of peeling paint reveals his intention to depict the world with all its imperfections, bereft of symbolism or flattery. I think there's some truth in that as well.
I think it's marvellous.
This is one of his most famous ones of Kitty Garman. Her father had been a very unusual guy. Her mother was his mistress, and Epstein used to visit her from his familial home between 6 and 7 o'clock every evening in his house in Chelsea. And Kitty's aunt first had a relationship with Laurie Lee and then with Lucian Freud, and she introduced Kitty to Lucian Freud. Very mixed, sort of very complex relationships going on there. Anyway, because of his infidelity and his womanizing, it took his toll on her health. They had 2 daughters, and she went to live with her parents, and then he started going with Carolyn. This is actually, I thought, a very interesting painting. She's still alive, of Kitty by a quite famous artist, Andrew 2006, and when she was what, I think in the 70s. I think they're really good paintings. I really like those.
Very realistic.
They're almost like photographs, aren't they?
Yeah,
they are. They are like photographs, exactly.
Experience is ingrained in her face.
Yeah, you can tell.
Her daughters, meanwhile, like Annie, who was born in 1948, she was painted nude by her father at the age of 14 for his 1963 portrait, Naked Child Laughing. She recalled him moving her hair off her nipples with his paintbrush. And she said that, you know, he laughed it off when she said she didn't like it. And I think this kind of attention affected them in different ways, and it wasn't always something that they wanted to do. So I think the jury's a bit out on that one, but I can't say I'm very impressed by the way in doing it. This is his second wife, Caroline Blackwood, and again, 2 early paintings by that.
She looks about 12.
She's
beautiful.
They are marvellous paintings, though.
When she was 21, she eloped with Freud to Paris before marrying him in 1943. They divorced in 1959. And again, his gambling and general recklessness led to the breakup in the marriage. With his last painting of Caroline, Girl by the Sea, being completed shortly before she left him. She was she was a Guinness heir. She was, you know, a real sort of society lady compared with some of the others. Now this is an interesting one. This is the artist in the studio with his finished painting of Rhea, who was, I don't know how he got to know her. It's a nude completed in 2007. It required 16 months of work, and Rhea Kirby posing all but 4 evenings during that time over 16 months. 16 months, God. 7 nights a week on top of a day job, with each session averaging 5 hours in the evening. It took approximately 2,400 hours to complete.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
one of the problems that artists had, which I'd never thought of, is they have difficulty knowing when they're finished with a painting. And his view on that was he feels that he's finished when he gets the impression he's working on somebody else's painting. You know, that he's actually got to the point where it's not his anymore, and at that point he stops. But I thought it was interesting there, just from the sheer amount of time he was spending on it. Anyway, just to give it just background on his children, he had 2 by Kathleen Garman, 4 by Susie Boyd, who then eventually looked after his will as with another trustee, 4 by Catherine McAdam, whose children were excluded from his will, 2 by Bernardine Coverley, 1 by Jacquetta Elliott, Countess of Saint-Germain, and 1 by Celia Paul. So he certainly took quite a while with all that. Well, seemed to enjoy himself.
He put it around, as you might say.
He did indeed.
The Elliott son.
It is quest, all right. My God.
Yeah.
You should have chopped it off.
St Germans is in Cornwall, quite near Plymouth.
My husband, I tell you, get the knife out. Bloody not having any more ding dong.
Yeah, so those are all the various children he had.
Wow.
So I want to go on to his. Can you close the door? Thank you. These are I just was Googled for his self-portraits, and these are just some of them with some other stuff. He did. I think he did overall round about 50 or 60 self-portraits, and
he was extremely talented.
Towards the end of his life, he spent an awful lot of time doing self-portraits. His earliest was done in 1939, and the final one was executed 64 years later. He died aged 88. And as I said, as he got older, he used more and more paint on them. They got more painterly. Asked if he was a good model for himself, Freud replied, "No, I don't accept the information that I get when I look at myself. That's where the trouble starts. It's that trouble that makes his self-portraits so compelling." And this is one of his later ones.
That's fantastic.
They are remarkable paintings, aren't they?
They are marvelous. Absolutely amazing.
He's got a very rugged face.
He said he never painted nudes. He always painted naked people, because nudes in classical art history form was, as Sir Kenneth Clark wrote, "To be naked is to be deprived of our clothes, and the word implies some sort of embarrassment most of us feel in that condition. But the nude is balanced and confident. In the great age of painting, the nude inspired the greatest work." But he was saying, no, I paint people with all their difficulties, with all their problems, with all their embarrassments. And it really was a new and really, really powerful form of portraiture that's been carried out by other people as well, but he was especially good at doing. This is one of his earlier ones, which again I really like. It looks very modern in a way to me, and just the angle of it is so unusual. What one ear's in shadow, one's in. It's a play of warm and cool colouring draws the viewer into the moment of self-reflection. But there's also, I think, in a lot of his paintings, a sense of menace as well. There's a kind of, you know, something uncomfortable about it all. And this, of course, is a very famous one.
Oh, yeah.
And it's of him, you know, there's no vanity going on in this. The slippers he's working in give it a slightly, you know, he walked around in slippers because there's so much paint on the floor. That's why he had these open slippers. And there is something, though, triumphant about it. You know, his brush is upraised like a general's baton. But he's also assessing himself really clearly. And at work, he did often paint in the nude because he got so dirty with it, I suppose. And what he was doing from day to day through to the night, almost obsessively as he got old, was painting immensely slowly one picture after another. And this one, I think, is, as Rachel Cook from The Guardian called it, it's noble and strange. And I think it is that. It's an immense painting, whichever way you want to look at it. This, I think, is one of the last ones he did. He was obviously very interested in the fact of the process of aging, and didn't back off from painting himself as he actually looked, or he felt he looked. I don't want to retire, he once said. I want to paint myself to death. And that's more or less what he did. It wasn't until 2 weeks before his death that he finally laid his brush down. Right. So that's my quick run through Lucian Freud. And I must say, I look at him differently now that I know more about him. I'm both really admiring of his works and really not liking him very much as a man. He got away, he led a very privileged life, but he was obsessive and absolutely contained within his work as well. And so I was talking about this to somebody last night, and they said, well, you know, do you listen to Wagner's music? I mean, Wagner was a sort of proto-fascist, wasn't he? Or a fascist. And yet you still listen to his work, and you still can see the beautiful music in it. It's a very hard one, that, but I think it's useful to know these things about somebody, so at least you are aware of the contradiction that goes on with it. It's a bit like those
shortcomings.
Yeah, I mean, what if Hitler had been a brilliant artist? Would we be looking at his art now from that point of view? It's very difficult to say. Anyway, anybody else got any views on it?
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I think his work is full of contradiction, like the man. So when he paints something, you see sort of, you're revolted at the same time as being fascinated and thinking it's beautiful. So one painting can actually be beautiful at the same time as offending you. I think that's
a good point.
Yeah, but the offence comes from the viewer, not from the artist. The artist is projecting what he sees without judgmental behaviour. And the one thing I find often when we talk about artists and their various sexual escapades is that people talk about the artist and not the woman or the man, who equally have their own choices. You know, it makes it feel like he's a serial predator instead of the idea that there is backwards and forwards negotiation going on. I mean, you mentioned Wagner. I mean, he stole von Bulow's wife, the very guy who put him on the map, and yet there is no morality there. But the stuff that's
how far would you take that, Bill? Say if Jimmy Savile had been a brilliant painter of children.
But you're talking about the difference between criminality and a view of life.
Is that the line you draw? Things that are criminal, it becomes different. I'm quite
of course, no, that's a very good question, because where is our own morality? It's down to our own morality as individuals. In what is it that's being portrayed? And when you look at Freud, when you showed the Dure picture, it's almost like a scientist scrutinizing something and displaying it as a frozen moment. But with Freud, there's energy, there's life, the things are living, and all of his and that's just my take on it. That first image you showed of the large lady on and the response is, oh, that's horrible. No, it's a fantastic painting. It's showing life. It's showing people as we are. You know, there is that unconscious bias through the process that we look at, that beauty is to do with people who are well shaped in a particular way. But it's not. Beauty is to do with all of us. And I think Freud was magnificent at what he did with that. As regards all the shenanigans or whatever, I think that's, how many of us can say we are squeaky clean?
I think what you've said there, Bill, I think it's very easy to put our own moralities onto other people and the way they choose to live their lives. And I'm not sure we have a right to do that, really. As long as, like you say, it's not a criminal act. I think, a bohemian life, you imagine 16 months being naked in front of somebody and then being naked, he being naked. I mean, human nature is what it is. And, sometimes things take over, don't they, from...
in between.
Oh, that relationship. I mean, if you're spending that much intimate time together, why are you going to be surprised that there is intimate activity?
Exactly.
We're human beings, for goodness sake. Let's stop being pure.
Sorry, we're on the last minute. So
that was wonderful, Bernard, and those paintings are astonishing. They're absolutely
Carried away.
Well, fantastic.
See you tomorrow.
It's so interesting, these sessions.
Fantastic.
I love them.
I'm going to put it up. I'll edit it down and put it up on the YouTube as well for other people.
Great.
Horrible.
Excellent. Thank you.
Fascinating.
Hi, everyone.
The ladies are everywhere. They've just got their clothes on. That's the only difference.
It's the male gaze and get your tits out. That's what it is.
I'm keeping that in, Sandy.
Yeah.